She handed me the envelope with both hands formal, deliberate, like she was presenting an award. There were 200 people in that room, and every single one of them was watching my face. That's the part that still makes me feel like a clown standing in the middle of a stage without realizing the entire audience is laughing at him. And the stupidest part was, I was actually happy. Proud, even. I stood there with a genuine smile on my face, thinking that after all those years of standing behind her and holding her up, she finally wanted to acknowledge it. That after 31 years, the woman I loved was finally about to say something kind about me in front of everyone. She was not about to do anything kind. The room was packed with Buckhead lawyers, Midtown developers, 2 Superior Court judges, and a photographer from the Atlanta Journal who'd come to document the launch of Claudette Dupree Holloway and Associates off Peachtree Street. Champagne in crystal glasses, Edison bulbs strung from exposed ceiling beams. The kind of space that costs $4,500 a month and makes you feel like you earned something just by standing in it. Claudette had been obsessed with that building since the moment we signed the lease together. And I do mean together, though somewhere between the lease signing and the grand opening, the word together quietly vanished from her vocabulary. I was standing near the back holding a tray of shrimp cocktail I'd personally driven down from Whole Foods on Ponce because Claudette said the caterer was overcharging and she trusted me to handle it. My knees had been aching since noon. I'd spent most of the afternoon unloading folding chairs from my truck in drizzling October rain because she said hiring extra staff at this stage was wasteful. 60 years old. Sweating through a gray dress shirt. And honestly, I wasn't even bitter about it. That's who I was. I was the man who showed up and handled things so Claudette didn't have to think about them. I thought that was love. I thought that was the whole point. When she tapped her champagne glass and said, "Can I borrow my husband for a moment?" people smiled. I actually felt proud walking up there. That's the part that still gets me. Pride. Walking toward the microphone, thinking she was finally going to say the thing I'd been waiting to hear for 31 years. Not thank you, exactly. Just acknowledgement. The overtime, the second mortgage after she failed the bar exam the first time. The frozen dinners I ate alone at our kitchen table in Cascade Heights while she studied upstairs surrounded by highlighters and lukewarm coffee. The 2 a.m. foot rubs when she cried and told me she was too old to start over. I believed in Claudette Dupree harder than she ever believed in herself. I built the foundation under her ambition with my own 2 hands. And I was walking toward that microphone thinking she was finally going to say so in front of everyone. She did not say so. She smiled at the crowd. She said, "Every successful law firm needs its first contract." A few polite laughs. Then she turned toward me, and tonight, she said, "that first contract will be my divorce." The room exploded. Not everyone laughed. Some people froze. I watched Pastor Dennis from our church grab his wife's arm like he needed something to hold. But enough people laughed. Enough people clapped. And Marcus Webb, 39 years old, navy suit vacuum-sealed across his shoulders, standing 2 feet to Claudette's left, nearly came off the ground applauding. Claudette reached behind the podium and produced a large manila envelope. She handed it to me with a smile that never once reached her eyes. "Raymond," she said into the microphone. Soft, controlled. "I think this is what's best for both of us." My fingertips went cold before I even opened it. I want to be honest with you right now because I think that matters when you're telling a story like this. Part of me still, in that exact moment, was searching for the explanation that made this a mistake. People do that. When you love somebody deeply enough, you spend the first few seconds of any catastrophe looking for the exit door that proves it isn't one. My brain was still running through possibilities, performance art, wrong envelope, some kind of surprise, while my hands were already opening the seal. Inside was real paperwork. County court filing stamp already on the front page. Somewhere behind me, glasses clinked together like nothing had changed. A woman near the bar whispered, "Oh my God." The photographer lifted his camera. I could actually hear the shutter. Claudette leaned in close, smile unmoved, voice dropping to a register only I could hear. "Please don't embarrass yourself tonight." I don't know why that cut deeper than the divorce papers did. Maybe because of the tone, not angry, not guilty, just managerial. Like I was a situation to be handled before the important guests sat down. Like 31 years had been quietly reclassified as a liability. For a second, I genuinely couldn't get a full breath. I looked out at 200 faces and saw people deliberately avoiding eye contact. If you've ever been over 50, You know that particular look, that small, agonizing social panic people enter when they're watching someone's marriage collapse in public and they don't know where to put their hands. I've seen that look at funerals. I saw it now. I looked down at the papers. That's when I noticed something was off. The packet felt thin, deliberately thin. My stomach dropped. I flipped through slowly. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then 8. No 7. Page 7 was missing, and suddenly the ballroom sounded very far away. Because 3 weeks earlier, Claudette had left her laptop open on the kitchen island in Cascade Heights, while she rushed out to meet Marcus downtown. She'd asked me to plug it in if the battery got low. I remembered exactly. An empty yogurt cup beside the mouse pad, the glow of the screen, the document sitting right there in plain view like it had always belonged to my life. Divorce, draft, final, V4, DocX. I'd sat down at the kitchen table and read every single page, including page 7. The wording was clinical enough to belong on a hospital intake form. It stated that I had demonstrated signs of mild cognitive decline and financial confusion over the preceding 12 months. It recommended that, in the interest of protecting marital assets during dissolution proceedings, Claudette should assume temporary control of all shared property, including ownership rights connected to the commercial building on Peachtree Street. My compensation for surrendering those rights was listed in black and white. $1. I stared at that number for a long time that night. Not because of the money, because of my father. 10 years earlier, after Daddy passed, I used part of his life insurance payout to help Claudette secure that building through an LLC we registered under both our names. He spent 40 years pouring concrete across the Atlanta metro driveways, foundations, parking structures, until the work bent both his hands sideways at the knuckles. That insurance check represented every hour he spent in Georgia heat doing work nobody wanted to talk about at dinner parties. And now my wife wanted to erase me from it with a fabricated diagnosis and $1. I remember sitting alone in that kitchen with the refrigerator humming and the neighborhood quiet outside. I opened a browser and typed, "Financial abuse, elderly spouses, divorce." What came back was a rabbit hole I wish I'd never had to visit. Stories about older partners being manipulated, isolated, pressured into signing things they didn't fully understand while still in shock. One line from an article hit me like a brick. Many victims hesitate to fight back because they feel ashamed. They miss the warning signs. Ashamed. Not angry. Ashamed. That was exactly right. I sat there at midnight feeling like a fool, not a victim. I drove to a gas station on Campbellton Road and sat in my truck listening to old Marvin Gaye with the engine running, rain on the windshield. 60 years old, and I felt ancient. I felt like something someone had already decided to leave at the curb. I stayed there almost an hour. Then I said something out loud to nobody. I am not going to destroy her, long pause, but I am not going to help her destroy me. The next morning I called Earl Fontaine. If you've spent enough time in Atlanta, you know there's always one attorney. Not the flashy buckhead firms, not the billboards, just a man with a real reputation. Earl had been a Fulton County prosecutor in the 90s before opening a small practice above a dry cleaner on Ralph David Abernathy. Divorces, property disputes, nothing glamorous. He still used a flip phone. That made me trust him immediately. When I walked into his office carrying a leather folder and looking like I hadn't slept in 4 days, Earl looked up from his desk, took one long look at me, and said, "Either you killed somebody, or Claudette finally showed you who she is." I almost laughed. Almost. His office smelled like old paper and chicory coffee. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead. He read the documents while eating boiled peanuts from a paper bag, not saying a word, slow, methodical. When he reached page 7, the printed copy I'd made before Claudette got home that night, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low, slow whistle. "Frank," he said. Then he corrected himself. "Raymond. This isn't just dirty, it's sloppy, and sloppy always leaves something behind." That was the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. Not because anything was funny, because having another person confirm I wasn't losing my mind felt like oxygen. He pointed at the cognitive decline language. "She can't deploy this unless she planned to pressure you into signing fast. She thinks you'll fold from embarrassment before you even read it carefully." I said quietly, "She's probably right that I would have." Earl shook his head. "No, she's right that the old you would have. We're working on the new version." The next 2 weeks felt like excavating the bones of my own life. Every box in the basement held another layer of our history together. Tax returns, mortgage documents, Christmas cards from 2003, a receipt from the first sofa we bought after our wedding at Ebenezer Baptist in 1994. You never understand how thoroughly paperwork outlives feeling until you're sorting through it alone. I found the LLC documents in an old filing cabinet behind the water heater. Claudette's signature right beside mine in blue ink. I spent 3 hours recovering access to an old email account because I remembered, years ago Claudette had sent me a message during the building negotiation. This wouldn't be happening without you. You know that, right? She had apparently forgotten to delete it. People get careless when they believe they've already won. Meanwhile, Claudette's behavior at home shifted into something that genuinely unnerved me. She became almost aggressively pleasant, controlled. One evening she brought home pasta from a restaurant we used to love, and asked if I wanted extra bread. That woman had not voluntarily brought me bread in 8 years. 2 days later, our joint credit card was declined at a gas station. No call, no text, just gone. I stood at the counter while a teenager behind the register stared at the ceiling. Then my truck disappeared from our driveway. Towed, she'd reported it abandoned through a contact in city parking enforcement. I spent half a day and $280 retrieving my own vehicle from an impound lot off I-20. When I got home, she was at the kitchen island typing, didn't look up. I put the tow receipt on the counter. She said, "You haven't been emotionally stable lately, Raymond." I didn't want to assume the truck would be moved. That sentence was rehearsed. I recognized it immediately. 30 years investigating fraud claims teaches you what scripted language sounds like: the slightly unnatural rhythm, the careful word choice, the absence of anything specific. She was practicing a narrative. That night I drove to the Waffle House on Moreland Avenue and used their Wi-Fi to organize my evidence because Claudette had changed the home internet password without mentioning it. Picture that for a second. A 60-year-old man sitting in a corner booth at midnight, laptop open next to a plate of scattered hash browns, organizing documents against his own wife, while a table of Emory students argued about a class project beside him. My daughter Simone climbed into the passenger seat of my truck an hour later. 36 years old, sharp. She'd inherited every ounce of Claudette's intelligence and none of her cruelty. Somehow she still tracked my location on the old family phone plan. She handed me a coffee and stared at the folders spread across my dashboard. "You okay, Dad?" "Nope." "Fair." For a while we just sat together in the parking lot. Rain on the windshield again. Then she picked up a printed screenshot of text messages from Marcus to Claudette. One in particular. "Older men sign anything if you embarrass them enough in public. Trust me." Simone read it twice, set it down carefully. Then she said very quietly, "That arrogant little fool?" I nodded. What hit me hardest wasn't the insult itself. It was the picture they had built of me in their minds. Not a husband, not a partner, not even an obstacle worth respecting. Just an aging man they expected to fold quietly to avoid a scene. The humiliation model only works if the target cares more about looking composed than being treated fairly. And for most of my life, they would have been right about me. Earl connected me with a private investigator named Leon Pruitt, retired GBI, gray mustache, wore New Balance sneakers with everything. Leon handed me a folder 11 days later containing phone records, location data, and a voicemail Claudette had deleted from a cloud-synced account she'd forgotten existed. I played the recording sitting in the Chick-fil-A parking lot off Piedmont. Claudette's voice, clear and unhurried. "Once Raymond signs, the building situation is completely clean." Then Marcus laughing. "Not nervous, comfortable. Old men sign anything if you embarrass them enough. You said it yourself." I turned off the recording and sat there gripping the steering wheel. 30 years chasing insurance fraud taught me one immutable lesson. The moment people stop perceiving you as fully human, they become reckless. They leave emails open. They make phone calls on synced accounts. They draft page 7 and forget that page 7 is evidence. Claudette and Marcus had become so certain I would fold that they stopped being careful. Arrogance is always the first step toward losing. The night before the grand opening, I stood alone in our garage holding a flash drive in one hand and a printed copy of page 7 in the other. Inside the house, I could hear Claudette's heels on the hardwood upstairs, steady, confident, already rehearsing her victory. My father's workbench stood against the far wall. His old tools hung in the same order he'd left them. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket. All right, Claudette. If you want a performance, let's give them one. Now, back in that ballroom. Back in the silence after I asked my wife to read page 7. The room had gone completely still, not quiet still. Even the jazz leaking from the ceiling speakers suddenly felt too loud. 200 people holding their breath. Claudette's smile had frozen, not collapsed, just frozen the way a face looks when the brain stops receiving instructions. Marcus shifted his weight beside her. One small movement, but I caught it. Claudette recovered first. Of course she did. She let out a soft, deliberate laugh and tilted her head like I was a confused old man having a difficult evening. Raymond, she said into the microphone, gentle and patient. This really isn't the place. Nervous laughter scattered through the room. Not much. People were recalibrating. This wasn't entertainment anymore. I looked out across the crowd. Pastor Dennis had both hands wrapped around his wineglass. A Superior Court judge near the front had stopped smiling entirely and folded his glasses in his hand. The bartender wasn't pouring. Marcus stepped forward. He tried for calm and only managed tense. Sir, this is a private matter. I turned toward him slowly. You helped write page 7, Marcus. You made it a public matter. That landed. You could feel it move through the room like cold air under a door. His jaw tightened. Claudette jumped back in, pivoting to the crowd. Raymond is upset. Understandably so. Emotions are running high. Read page 7. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. For the first time all evening, I saw something behind Claudette's eyes that wasn't rehearsed. Uncertainty. Genuine, unscripted uncertainty. She had spent months constructing this version of herself, polished, untouchable, the woman who made her own terms, and now I could see the structure starting to fracture underneath it. She lowered the microphone slightly. Raymond, please. That word almost broke me. I want to be honest about that. For one dangerous second, something inside me started to soften. Because I still remembered the other Claudette, the woman who danced in our kitchen in mismatched socks while something burned on the stove. The woman who grabbed my hand in the parking lot after she got her bar exam results and cried with her whole body. The woman who used to look at me like I was the only person who'd never made her feel small. That version of her was still somewhere inside me, which is the cruelest thing betrayal does. It doesn't erase the love, it just makes it useless. Then I remembered sitting in a Waffle House at midnight using free Wi-Fi, because my wife had changed the password in our shared home. Something clarified. I stepped toward the podium and opened my leather folder. You gave me an incomplete document tonight, I said, calm and even. The missing page claims I'm experiencing cognitive decline and proposes that my ownership rights in this building, funded by my late father's life insurance, be transferred in exchange for $1. The low murmur that rolled through the room was different from before. Not laughter, something heavier. Someone said, "What?" Claudette grabbed the microphone. That language was part of a preliminary draft. It was never finalized. It had a filing stamp. Silence. The judge near the front unfolded his glasses and slowly put them back on. Claudette's voice sharpened. Emotions are distorting. Marcus made his final mistake. He stepped closer to me and said, with practiced condescension, "Sir, you seem confused." And suddenly, the cognitive decline language wasn't theoretical anymore. It was a coordinated performance, playing out in real time, in front of witnesses. The judge saw it. I watched him see it. I reached into my coat pocket and produced the flash drive. Claudette's eyes locked onto it immediately. The color in her face shifted. I walked to the sound system near the reception desk. A young employee started to object, then reconsidered. Smart kid. I plugged the drive in. Static. 1 second of silence. Then Claudette's voice filled the room like it belonged there. Once Raymond signs, the building situation is completely clean. Nobody moved. Marcus, through the speakers, old men sign anything if you embarrass them enough. You said it yourself. A woman near the bar gasped softly. Marcus went pale so fast it looked painful. Claudette stepped toward me. Turn that off. I didn't. A second recording played. Claudette, lower this time, tired and certain. He won't fight back in public. He cares too much what people think. That one cut the deepest. Because she'd been right. She had known exactly who I was. She just hadn't accounted for who I was deciding to become. A longtime church friend named Gerald Mann I'd known 22 years, shook his head slowly, set his glass on a table, picked up his coat, and walked out without a word. That single exit hit Claudette harder than anything I'd said. Gerald had known both of us since before she passed the bar. His silence was a verdict. Then the front doors opened. Simone walked in. And behind her, in red heels sharp enough to cut glass, walked Diane Webb Marcus's wife. I genuinely did not know Simone had called her. I found out afterward that she'd tracked Diane down through a mutual connection 3 days earlier, on the off chance this moment arrived. My daughter is 36 years old, and has always been 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. Diane walked straight across that ballroom floor without slowing down. Marcus saw her coming and said, "Diane, this isn't—" She took the champagne flute right out of his hand, poured it slowly and deliberately over his Italian leather shoes. Then she said, flat and final, "The Benz is in my name. I suggest you call a lift." She turned around and walked back out without raising her voice once. Half the room looked mortified. The other half looked like they'd just witnessed a miracle. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I've ever stood in. Claudette finally looked at me differently. Not with contempt, not with strategy, just with something exhausted and exposed. "You were supposed to love me enough to let me have this," she said. Very quietly, just for me. I looked at her for a long moment, at the building we'd signed together, at the woman I'd rubbed the feet of at 2 a.m. in our small house on the southwest side, at everything that had been and everything that was gone. "I loved you enough to help build this dream, Claudette," I told her. "I just don't hate myself enough to let you steal it." Her eyes filled. Not dramatically, just enough to ruin the image she'd spent all night constructing. I gathered my paperwork. No victory speech. No raised voice. I simply caught Earl's eye across the room. He'd been standing near the back wall the entire time, and gave him one nod. Then I walked to the door. Nobody clapped. Nobody said a word. But stepping out into the cool Atlanta night, rain tapping the Peachtree Street sidewalk, I realized something strange had happened inside my chest. The thing that had been crushing me for months, that quiet, suffocating weight of deciding whether to disappear politely or to stay standing, was simply gone. People think the moment you reclaim your dignity feels triumphant. Like a movie ending. It doesn't. It feels like exhaling. Like finally sitting down after standing on concrete all day. Not joy. Just relief. 3 days later, I woke up in a furnished apartment off Cascade Road, with a stiff neck and a microwave meal in my freezer. That was my big morning after. A local meteorologist on WSB warned about early cold moving through the metro. I stood there barefoot in gym shorts thinking, "Well, Raymond, you sure handled that." I didn't feel victorious. I felt like a man who had survived something and now had to figure out what came next. The divorce took 14 more months. Turns out presenting fabricated cognitive decline language and missing legal pages in front of 2 judges and a room full of attorneys creates complications nobody anticipated. The Pennsylvania Bar Association, equivalent in Georgia the State Bar, received an anonymous package of photocopied documents. Earl swore it wasn't him. I believed about 40% of that. 2 of Claudette's major clients quietly ended their relationships with the firm over the following 6 months. The AJC article about the grand opening never ran. A small item appeared on page 4 about a domestic dispute at a midtown business launch. That probably irritated Claudette more than anything else. She always wanted her name associated with significance. In the end, the whole night got reduced to 2 disappointing paragraphs beside an ad for a Gwinnett mattress warehouse. Life has its own sense of timing. I spent most evenings alone in that apartment. Microwave food off paper plates because unpacking real dishes felt too permanent. One night during a Falcons game I didn't actually care about, I watched a frozen meal rotate behind the microwave door and felt the quiet asking me hard questions. Silence at 60 is different from silence at 30. When you're young, loneliness still feels like a temporary season. At my age, empty rooms start asking whether you know who you are when there's nobody left to be useful to. I found myself missing absurd things. The sound of Claudette blow-drying her hair upstairs, her reading glasses left on the kitchen counter, the way she always reached over and stole fries off my plate after insisting she wasn't hungry. You can miss someone and still know, in every bone you have, that they chose to stop being who they were. Both things are true at the same time. That's the part nobody tells you. About 6 months after the grand opening, I drove past the building on Peachtree by accident. Just happened. The sign still hung outside. One office light glowed through the rain. I sat across the street at a red light watching the water run down my windshield, and 31 years arrived in the truck beside me all at once. I cried then, quietly, the way men my age cry, not dramatically, just steadily, like something finally draining. But I realized partway through that I wasn't mourning Claudette anymore. I was mourning the future we were supposed to have. The back porch, the retirement trips, the grandchildren we'd spoil together in our old house, with the wind chimes out back. Divorce after 50 doesn't steal the person. It steals the ending you spent decades walking toward. Eventually, the settlement closed. I lost the house. That hurt, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I kept my ownership share in the building, a meaningful portion of my pension, and enough savings to begin again without depending on anyone. Earl said that counted as winning. I've come around to believing he was right. Simone gave me the idea that changed everything. You know how many older people get tricked into signing things they don't understand? She asked over breakfast one morning near Route 78. You spent 30 years catching fraud. Who's better qualified? 3 months later, I opened a small consulting practice in East Point. I named it Holloway Senior Protection Consulting after my father. Seeing his name on the glass door for the first time steadied something in me that I hadn't felt in years. We help older adults review suspicious contracts, identify financial manipulation by family members, and recognize pressure tactics in legal documents. Nothing glamorous, everything meaningful. One of my first clients was a 73-year-old woman whose nephew had slipped property transfer forms into her husband's hospice paperwork. 3 years earlier I might have handled the paperwork and missed what it meant. Now I see everything. Pain sharpens your vision, if you survive it correctly. The last time I saw Claudette was outside the Fulton County Courthouse, 20 months after the grand opening. Cold morning, gray sky. She stood by her Lexus in a long black coat and looked older than I remembered. Not ruined, just touched by time the way life eventually touches everyone, regardless of what we're building. We stood there for a moment without speaking. Cars moved through the intersection behind us. Finally, she asked quietly, "How much pain did you want me to feel?" I thought about that seriously before answering. Because revenge is a shapeshifter. First you want justice, then you want acknowledgement, then humiliation, then you want them to hurt exactly as much as you did. And if you follow that road far enough, it starts costing you things you can't afford to lose. I didn't want you hurt, Claudette. Then why? I looked at her for a long time. Because you stopped seeing me as a person before any of this started. And somewhere along the way I stopped seeing myself that way too. This wasn't about you anymore. It was about me finally deciding I mattered. Her eyes filled. She nodded the way someone nods when they hear a verdict they already knew was coming. I got in my truck and drove home through Atlanta traffic, coffee cooling in the cup holder, the city moving around me in that particular late morning way. It does, unhurried, alive, indifferent, carrying everyone's stories simultaneously. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. At peace. Not because I won. Not because she lost. But because I had finally treated myself the way I'd spent 31 years treating everyone else like someone worth protecting. If you have ever done everything right for someone who was quietly deciding you were in the way, you already understand exactly what I'm talking about. You already know the specific exhaustion of loving someone who has stopped seeing you. And if this story reached something real in you, I need you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment. Type 1 if you think Raymond made the right call at the grand opening. 2 if you think he should have walked out quietly and handled everything through the courts. Or 3 if you think there's something about Claudette's side of the story worth understanding. I read every single one. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there, because I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. If something in Raymond's experience mirrors something in your own life, share it. Not for me, for someone else watching who thinks they're the only one going through it. If this story meant something to you, hitting subscribe costs you nothing, and keep stories like this one coming. I'll be back soon with another one that I think is going to hit even harder than this. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, living or deceased, or to actual events is entirely coincidental.